I was frustrated. It had been a long day at work, and I was finally home, hoping for a bit of peace. Chloe, my wife of 15 years, was out for the evening, and the house was eerily quiet. My mind was racing. Something had been off for a while now. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the doubt kept creeping in. That's when I found it, an email. It was a simple notification that popped up on my phone, an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject was casual, just a name. But as I opened it, my heart began to race. You were so wonderful last night. I can't stop thinking about you. I'm already waiting for the next one. It was a message from someone named Liam. At first, I couldn't understand. The words didn't make sense. But as I read them again, it started to sink in. The email wasn't about a late-night work meeting or a friendly chat. This was personal. A few more lines followed. I can't wait to see you again. It's perfect, just like we planned. I can feel it. Everything is right when we're together. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Chloe had been seeing someone. Not just anyone, Liam. My best friend. My confidant. The one person I trusted more than anyone in the world. I had always been blind to their connection, dismissing the little things, the strange tension, the private conversations. But now, there was in black and white. My wife had betrayed me. And worse, she had done so with the one person I never imagined would hurt me. I scrolled down further, hoping to find something, anything, that would prove it wasn't true. But then my eyes froze. There it was, buried deep in the message. A line that changed everything. How are the kids? And Ethan? That fool still doesn't get it, does he? At first I froze. The mention of Ethan, my name, my kids. I read the rest of the message, each sentence hitting me like a punch to the gut. I can't believe Ethan is still so clueless. He hasn't figured out that Noah's not his, has he? Noah, my son, my little boy. I had raised him, loved him, and watched him grow up. He always been mine, or at least I thought he was. But now, everything was in question. My heart stopped as the realization hit. My son wasn't mine. I couldn't breathe. I felt the blood rush to my head as anger and confusion overwhelmed me. My whole world, my family, everything I had built was a lie. I sat there, motionless, the email still glowing on my phone screen. It felt like the world around me had paused. My breath was shallow, and my hands trembled. I replayed the words over and over in my head. The idea that Noah wasn't mine, the boy I had spent years raising, teaching, loving. How could this be true? I wanted to scream, to throw my phone, to storm out of the house and confront Chloe. But I couldn't. The shock held me in place, and the anger bubbling up inside me was so intense, I could barely think straight. My mind was spinning with questions. How long had this been going on? How could Chloe do this to me? To Noah? I needed answers. I needed to see for myself. I stood up and paced the living room, my thoughts racing. The email had shaken me to my core, but there was one thing I couldn't ignore: proof. I needed proof that Noah wasn't mine. The thought of confronting Chloe, of demanding answers without knowing the truth, made me sick to my stomach. But I knew I had to. I'd seen the tension between Chloe and Liam before, but I had dismissed it. Had I been that blind? Had I really trusted them both so much that I overlooked the signs? Maybe. But now, there was no denying it. My entire life, my family, everything I thought I knew was a lie. I grabbed my jacket and left the house. My first stop, Dr. Jeffries, an old family friend who just so happened to be a dentist. I needed him for something else, something I couldn't do alone. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my car keys and called Noah's name, loud enough for him to hear from his room upstairs. Hey buddy, come on downstairs. We're going to the dentist. Noah, the 10-year-old boy I had thought of as mine for all these years, came rushing down the stairs, smiling as usual. You're taking me to Dr. Sanders? He asked, excited. Cool. I like Dr. Sanders. I forced a smile, but inside my stomach was in knots. I wasn't taking him for a routine checkup. I had a plan, one that would give me the answers I needed. We arrived at Dr. Sanders' office not long later. I had made the appointment under the pretense of a regular dental checkup for Noah. The dentist, a longtime family friend, greeted us with his usual warmth. Ethan, Noah, good to see you both. How's everything? Dr. Sanders asked as he led us to the exam room. Everything's fine, I said, my voice flat. Just here for a routine checkup today. After the usual cleaning and checkup, I knew the moment was coming. Dr. Sanders finished up with Noah, who was clearly enjoying his trip to the dentist, and turned to me. Anything else I can do for you today? He asked, cleaning his hands. I paused for a moment, then decided to take the plunge. Actually, yes, I said, looking him in the eye. Can you collect a saliva sample from Noah? Something private. I need to know something, and I can't trust anyone else to do it. Dr. Sanders raised an eyebrow. A saliva sample? Are you sure? I nodded, trying to suppress the growing unease in my chest. I just need it for personal reasons. You know I trust you, right? He hesitated, then nodded. All right, I'll make sure it's discreet. A few minutes later, Noah was out of the chair and had been swabbed. It was quick, nothing out of the ordinary. I kept the saliva sample sealed in a small tube, my heart pounding as I walked out of the office, my mind already racing ahead. The next stop was a DNA testing lab I knew well. I had used their services for a few different things over the years, so I knew they would keep everything confidential. I drove straight to the lab, my thoughts consumed by the task at hand. As soon as I arrived, I handed over the saliva sample and explained what I needed. Can you run a paternity test for me? I asked. I need to know if this child is mine. The technician looked at me, his expression unreadable. We'll get it processed. It'll take a couple of days to get the results. I nodded and left the lab, the weight of what I had just done settling heavily in my chest. But there was no turning back now. I had to know. That night I stayed in. Chloe came home late, as usual, and acted like nothing was wrong. I couldn't even look at her the same way anymore. How could I? I had already seen the truth, even though I didn't have the results yet. Every time she smiled at me, I felt a pit form in my stomach. She kissed me, asked how my day went, and we had dinner like any other night. But for me, everything was different. I wasn't sure how I could look at her and pretend everything was okay. 2 days later, I sat in my car, the same pit of dread gnawing at my stomach. The lab called earlier. The results were in. I didn't want to go inside, didn't want to hear the truth. But I knew I had no choice. I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. It was like a cancer eating at me from the inside. The email, the lies, Chloe's coldness, and then the realization that Noah, my Noah, wasn't mine after all. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was about to come. Inside the lab, the technician greeted me with the same neutral expression. The results are ready, he said, handing me an envelope sealed shut. We've run the test. The paternity test results are in. Just take your time with it, okay? I nodded, but I couldn't feel my legs as I walked back to my car. My fingers trembled as I fumbled with the envelope, finally tearing it open. The test results were clear, written in bold letters across the top. Noah is not your biological son. My vision blurred, and I could barely breathe. I had suspected it, yes, but seeing the proof, the cold, scientific confirmation, it felt like a punch to the gut. It was official now. Everything I had believed was a lie. The world outside my car window felt distant, as if I were watching everything from a great distance. I didn't want to accept it. I didn't want to believe it. But deep down I knew. The email. The lies. The secret life Chloe and Liam had been living behind my back. The anger surged again, hot and uncontrollable. But underneath it, there was something else, something darker. Betrayal. Pain. I couldn't even look at my son the same way now, and the thought of confronting Chloe made my blood boil. The next day, I did what I had to do. I went to see my parents. Chloe and I had been married for over 15 years, and although my family had always been close to hers, I needed them now more than ever. I wanted support. I wanted someone to tell me that this wasn't real, that I was imagining things. When I walked into my parents' house, their faces lit up with the usual warmth. But I knew this wasn't going to be a normal visit. Ethan, how's everything, son? My father asked, his voice full of concern. I hesitated, standing just inside the door. I knew that once I opened my mouth, there would be no going back. But I couldn't keep it in any longer. My chest felt like it was going to explode from the pressure. Mom, Dad, I began, my voice shaking. I need to tell you something. Something I just found out. It's about Chloe. My parents exchanged looks, and I could already see the concern building in their eyes. "What about Chloe?" my mother asked softly, sensing the gravity in my tone. I swallowed hard. "I found out she's been cheating on me with Liam." My father's face went white. He shook his head like he couldn't process it. "Liam? Your best friend?" "Ethan, that can't be true." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady but cold. "I found an email. It's all there. They've been sleeping together." And I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. "And Noah? Noah isn't my son." The room went silent. I couldn't look at their faces. I couldn't bear the thought of them seeing the pain in my eyes. But the silence was deafening. My mother was the first to speak. "You need to calm down, Ethan," she said, her voice sharp. "You're upset. This isn't the time to make accusations." "I'm not accusing her, Mom. I'm telling you the truth," I said, finally meeting her gaze. "I have the proof. I had a DNA test done. It's not my son." My father stood up then, his face dark with emotion. "You don't have to be dramatic about this. Chloe's your wife. She's been through a lot. Maybe there's more to this than you're seeing. Maybe you're misunderstanding something." I shook my head. "I'm not misunderstanding anything, Dad. This isn't a mistake. This is betrayal. This is a lie. And you don't get it. Chloe has been lying to me for years. And Liam, he's been in on it the whole time." My mother sighed and put her hand on my shoulder. "Ethan, you've been so busy with work and everything else. Maybe Chloe just made a mistake. We all make mistakes. You think this is a mistake?" I shouted, my voice rising. "She's been sleeping with Liam. She's been pretending that Noah is my son for 10 years, and now I find out the truth. This isn't a mistake. This is betrayal. And I'm done. I'm done with her. I'm done with you guys." I couldn't believe what I was saying. My own parents were siding with her. They didn't even believe me. "I'm sorry, Ethan," my father said, his voice stiff. "But Chloe's been a part of this family for years. We've always considered her like a daughter. We can't just turn our backs on her like this." I was speechless. My own parents, who had seen me raise Noah, who had witnessed the years of love and sacrifice I'd poured into my family, were taking Chloe's side. They were blaming me for leaving her, blaming me for not being there when she needed me the most. That's when I realized I wasn't going to get any support from them. I was alone in this. It felt like everything inside of me was unraveling. That night, as Chloe lay beside me, oblivious to the storm raging inside my mind, I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't pretend any longer. The lies were suffocating me, and I had no choice but to break free. The next morning, I packed a bag, my heart racing with every movement. I didn't even tell Chloe I was leaving. I couldn't bring myself to face her, not now, not after everything that had happened. I left the house, leaving behind the family, the life I thought I had, and I started over. As I walked out the door, I knew Chloe wouldn't notice right away. She was still lost in her world of lies. It wasn't until days later that she would realize I was gone, and by then, it wouldn't matter. I drove for hours, unsure of where I was headed, but certain of one thing: I needed to leave it all behind. I couldn't stay in that town, in that house, surrounded by the memories of a life that wasn't real. It didn't take long for Chloe to realize I was gone. At first, it was subtle, just small things. My jacket missing from the hook by the door, the sound of my car not pulling into the driveway at night. She didn't question it initially, assuming I was just out late or that work had kept me occupied. But soon, her unease began to build. It was when she noticed my things were missing, my keys, my wallet, my laptop, that the weight of my departure fully hit her. She walked into the living room one morning and found the house strangely empty. The bed, where I had been just hours before, was now cold. She called out for me, thinking I might be in the garage, the kitchen, or in the study. But I wasn't there. Her panic set, and almost immediately, she reached for her phone and called me. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. The silence on the other end of the line sent a chill down her spine. She texted, asking where I was if something had happened. No reply. It wasn't until later that night, after an entire day had passed, that she noticed something more. I had disappeared completely. There were no traces of me anywhere. My things were gone, my shoes by the door, my wallet, the photos of us on the walls. They were all still there, but I was not. It hit her then, a sickening realization. I had left. She couldn't comprehend it at first. Her fingers trembled as she dialed my number, leaving messages full of desperation. "Ethan, please," she would say, her voice breaking. "Where are you? Come home. I'm sorry, I don't know what's happened, but please come back. We can fix this." But it was too late. The moment I walked out the door, I had left behind more than just a house. I had left behind a life that was no longer mine. I wasn't going back. Chloe's world had always been built on stability and comfort. She was used to the luxury I provided, the life I had worked so hard to create for us. My departure, without warning, upended everything. The control she once had over her world began to slip through her fingers like sand. The days turned into a blur for her. She tried calling Liam, of course, but the calls didn't offer much solace. He was struggling too. He tried to comfort her, but his words felt hollow even to him. His business, once the envy of our town, began to unravel in the same way their relationship had. Clients dropped him. Investors pulled out. His company, which had always seemed untouchable, filed for bankruptcy in a matter of weeks. Liam's public persona crumbled. Once a successful entrepreneur, he now found himself isolated, with no one willing to stand by him. His colleagues, who had once praised his ambition, now whispered behind his back. He had lost his professional network, and worse, he had lost his reputation. The affair with Chloe, once a secret that only a few knew, had now become public knowledge, and no one was willing to look at him the same way again. He became a symbol of failure, both professionally and personally. As their lives began to fall apart, so did Chloe's facade of composure. The woman who had always been at the top of her game, who had never worried about the future, now found herself scrambling for anything that could give her some sense of stability. Without Ethan, without the life she had depended on, she was nothing. Her luxury home, once a symbol of their success, now felt like a prison. Her social circle, once full of friends eager to bask in her wealth, began to distance themselves. People who had once envied her now pitted her. Whispers followed her wherever she went. In a small town like ours, word travels fast, and soon enough, everyone knew about the affair. It wasn't just the external losses that shattered Chloe. It was the internal collapse. The guilt she had managed to suppress for so long began to gnaw at her. She had betrayed the man who had given her everything, and now she had nothing. Her tears, once only for herself, became cries for a life that she had destroyed. She reached out to me, hoping I would return. Maybe we could fix things, she reasoned, but no message or phone call would bring me back. By the time she realized that, the damage had already been done. Meanwhile, Liam, unable to weather the storm of his own collapse, continued to spiral. He tried to keep the facade of his business going, but without Ethan, without the ties he had once had, he couldn't keep it afloat. Everything fell apart in a matter of months. He had spent so much time focusing on himself, on his ego, that he had never once stopped to think about the consequences of what he had done. For Grace and Noah, the collapse of their family was a storm they never saw coming. They had been children of privilege, growing up in a house filled with laughter, love, and the illusion of security. But that illusion shattered the moment Ethan walked out the door. No one had prepared them for this. No one had given them the tools to understand that the life they thought they knew was a lie. Grace, now 15, was old enough to understand some of what was happening, but she was too young to fully grasp the betrayal that had torn her family apart. She had always been close to her father, looking to him for guidance and stability. She hadn't known about the affair. She hadn't seen the cracks in the foundation of their home. The idea that her father wasn't Noah's biological parent was something she couldn't wrap her head around. How could that be true? How could everything she had known, every hug, every bedtime story, every lesson, be based on something false? For the first few days, Grace didn't say much. She withdrew into herself, her world now colored by an overwhelming sense of confusion. She didn't know who to turn to. The people she had once trusted, her mother, her father, even Liam, were no longer the people she thought they were. She felt lost in a sea of questions, none of which had answers. Noah, only 10, was even more vulnerable. For him, the betrayal was almost too much to comprehend. He had always felt like Ethan was his dad, even though, at times, he had wondered why they didn't look more alike. He didn't fully understand what it meant for someone to be a biological parent, or what it meant for Ethan not to be his father. To him, Ethan had always been the person who held him when he was scared, who helped him with his homework, who took him to the park and watched him play soccer. But now, that person was gone. Ethan was gone, and nothing made sense. The emotional fallout hit both children like a tidal wave. Grace, in her quiet way, began to rebel. She stayed out later, stopped talking to her mother as much, and started pulling away from the people who had once been her friends. She couldn't face the pity in their eyes. She couldn't stomach the whispers. Noah, too, withdrew. He stopped smiling. He stopped running to the door when Chloe came home, expecting to see his dad walk through it, too. When Chloe tried to talk to him about the changes, he just stared at her, his eyes filled with a sadness she couldn't understand. There was so much he wasn't saying, so much that he couldn't even begin to process. He didn't want to be part of a family that had fallen apart so easily. It was clear that Grace and Noah could no longer live with Chloe. The strain between them was unbearable. Chloe, for all her mistakes, tried to hold it together for them, but there was no masking the reality that they were no longer the perfect family. They could no longer pretend. In the end, Grace and Noah were sent to live with Ethan's parents, Charles and Margaret Donovan, in a town about an hour away. It was supposed to be a temporary solution, but as time passed, it became clear that the tension between the children and their grandparents was too much to ignore. Charles and Margaret were kind, but they had their own way of coping with the situation. They didn't know how to be the parents they needed to be for Grace and Noah. Their house felt like a mausoleum, full of well-meaning advice and unspoken grief. Every conversation seemed to be about the past, about things no one wanted to address. Grace and Noah felt like they were living in the shadow of a family that no longer existed. The house, once a place of comfort for Ethan, was now just a reminder of everything he had left behind. The walls, lined with old family photos, told a story that didn't include the children or the reality of what they were facing now. Grace struggled to fit into a life that wasn't hers. Noah's sadness weighed on her, and she tried to protect him, but she had nothing left to give. They spent their days in silence, each lost in their own world of hurt and confusion. But the tension in the house was palpable, and even their grandparents began to feel it. There was only so much that could be done with love and good intentions when the pain of betrayal was hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Ethan's decision to leave was final. He was determined to rebuild his life, to escape the web of lies and betrayal that had once held him captive. But leaving wasn't as simple as just walking away. Even in a new city, the weight of the past clung to him like a second skin. For months, he tried to bury the pain, focusing on work, pushing himself to succeed, as though the rush of achievement could drown out the echoes of everything he had lost. He threw himself into the tech industry, using his years of experience and knowledge to create something fresh, a startup that would become his second chance. The city was filled with energy, a world away from the life he'd left behind. People here didn't know who he was. They didn't care about the drama or the wreckage he had walked away from. They only cared about his ideas, his skills, and his vision. It wasn't long before Ethan's startup started to gain traction. His product, designed to improve communication within businesses, found an audience. Investors took notice, and soon, he was running a successful company that brought him both respect and financial stability. Yet, no matter how much he succeeded professionally, something was missing. Ethan didn't know how to connect with people anymore. He wasn't the same person he had been before Chloe, before Liam, before the destruction of his family. Trust, once so natural to him, now seemed like a foreign concept. He avoided close relationships, preferring the company of his work and the quiet of his apartment. But it didn't take long before something, or rather, someone began to change all of that. It was Tessa Blackwood, a freelance writer, who unknowingly pulled Ethan out of his shell. She wasn't like the women he had known before. She didn't try to impress him, didn't act like she was interested in his success, his money, or his reputation. She simply existed, and that, Ethan realized, was exactly what he needed. Tessa was independent, driven, and passionate about her work, but unlike the people in Ethan's past, she didn't expect anything from him. Their first meeting was casual, at a networking event that Ethan reluctantly attended. Tessa was sitting alone at a table, typing away on her laptop. When she looked up and caught his eye, she gave him a simple nod, as though they had been friends for years. There was no pretense in Tessa's presence. No forced conversation, no flattery, just quiet understanding. She didn't ask him questions he didn't want to answer, and she didn't probe into his personal life. It was the first time in a long while that Ethan felt like he could just be. They began to spend more time together, slowly at first. A coffee here, a conversation there. And, little by little, Ethan started to feel the walls he had built around himself begin to crack. Tessa wasn't trying to fix him. She wasn't trying to heal him. She simply listened, letting him say as much or as little as he wanted. When he was ready to open up, she was there. When he needed space, she respected it. As the months passed, their relationship deepened. But it wasn't just the romantic kind of connection Ethan had imagined in the past. It was something more. Tessa helped him let go of the pain, the anger that had been simmering inside him for so long. She taught him that it was okay to be vulnerable, that he didn't need to carry the weight of the past forever. Together, they started traveling, exploring new places and new cultures. Each new experience was a step toward healing. Ethan found himself rediscovering parts of who he used to be before the betrayal, before the world had turned upside down. He began to laugh again, to enjoy life without the constant shadow of his past. But even with Tessa by his side, the pain of the betrayal still lingered. Ethan had forgiven her, forgiven Liam in his own way, but the scars remained. No amount of success, no amount of travel or time away from his past could erase the fact that Chloe, the woman he had trusted more than anyone, had shattered his life. One night, after a quiet dinner together, Tessa looked at him across the table, her expression thoughtful. "You've come a long way, Ethan," she said softly. "But I can see there's still a part of you that's holding on to the past. You can't move forward until you let go of it completely." Ethan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. He had come so far, but there was still something pulling him back, something unfinished. He hadn't truly confronted everything that had happened, not in the way he needed to. For years had passed, and though I had rebuilt my life, something still nagged at me. I had moved on, but I needed closure. I had to face the people who betrayed me, my parents. They had sided with Chloe after everything, and I needed them to see the truth. I pulled up to my childhood home, feeling a knot in my stomach. I hadn't expected to come back, but here I was. My father, Charles, opened the door, his surprise barely concealed. "Ethan," he said, "what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to Mom," I said, cutting him off. Inside, my mother stood, her face a mask of disbelief. "What is this, Ethan?" she asked. "You left. You didn't fight for your family." "I didn't abandon anyone," I shot back. "I left because I couldn't live a lie. Chloe, she had an affair with Liam. And Noah, he's not my son." Silence filled the room. My mother gasped. My father's face turned hard. "You're lying," my mother cried. "Am I?" I said. "I have the DNA results. The truth is out. You both sided with them, and you're still defending them." "You left us," my father said, voice shaking with anger. "You didn't even try." "I didn't leave. I walked away from the lies," I retorted. "I couldn't stay in that house any longer pretending everything was fine." "You think you're the only one suffering," my mother said, her voice breaking. "What about your children?" "They deserve better," I said. "But not at the cost of my happiness. Not at the cost of my soul." I turned to leave, and before stepping out the door, I looked back. "I'm done," I said quietly, then walked out. I didn't need their forgiveness. I was free. Weeks passed after my confrontation with my parents. Life in the town I had once called home had resumed, but it no longer held any grip on me. I had moved on, my work thriving, and my days filled with purpose. Yet there was someone that still lingered in the back of my mind. One Saturday afternoon, I found myself at a local coffee shop, sitting at a corner table with my laptop open. I was focused on my work, The hum of the crowd around me, just background noise. As I took a sip of my coffee, I glanced up, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. There she was, Chloe. My heart tightened in my chest as she walked in, her eyes scanning the room. Her hair was different, shorter, more grown-up, but there was no mistaking the face I had once loved. The woman who had torn my world apart was standing only a few feet away. She hadn't seen me yet. I had a choice: pretend I didn't see her and leave, or confront her. The old, angry version of me would have stormed over, demanded answers. But I was no longer that person. I was different, calm, at peace. Finally, I closed my laptop and stood up, walking toward her. "Ethan," Chloe's voice caught in her throat when she saw me. Her eyes seemed to shimmer with something, a mixture of regret and uncertainty. She didn't know what to say, and frankly, I didn't know either. I stood there for a long moment, just looking at her. The years of hurt and betrayal seemed like a lifetime ago now. Still, I couldn't deny the strange feeling of closure this moment brought. "Chloe," I said softly, "I didn't expect to run into you here." She nodded, glancing around nervously. "I didn't expect this either," she said, her voice faltering. How are you?" "I'm fine," I replied, my tone even. "I've moved on. Life's been good." She seemed to wilt under my gaze, unsure of how to proceed. I wasn't angry anymore. What was the point? Her choices had already shaped our past, but I had the power to decide my future. We exchanged a few words of small talk, awkward but civil. And then, before she could say anything more, I added one last thing. "I'm not angry, Chloe, but I've let go of everything. I don't hold on to the past anymore." She seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, but there was something else in her eyes, a realization, perhaps. "I've been thinking about everything too," she said quietly. "It's hard, Ethan. I lost everything. My family, my friends, the life I knew." I nodded, not offering sympathy, but acknowledging the truth. "Yeah, sometimes we lose things we didn't even realize we had until they're gone." She hesitated for a moment, then asked, "What now? Do you have a family?" I smiled softly. "Not yet, but I've found peace. I've moved on." As I walked away, I felt lighter. The past was behind me, and I wasn't going to let it drag me down anymore. But as I stepped out of the coffee shop, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Grace. "Hey, Ethan, I was thinking maybe I could come visit. I know things haven't been easy, but I just wanted to say, I miss you, and I miss Noah too." I smiled at the message. Grace had always been kind, even when everything else was falling apart. I replied quickly, "You're welcome to come anytime. If you need a place to stay, my door's always open." The thought of Grace living with me filled me with a sense of hope I hadn't expected. She had suffered through the same betrayals, and though she was much younger, I knew she was trying to find her own way through the wreckage. I could help her with that. And Noah? Well, Noah and I had come to a quiet understanding over the years. He knew the truth, and while things would never be the same, we had a good relationship. It was enough. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real now. I had no illusions left. I had my work, my new life, and the possibility of something more with Tessa. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself healing. Grace came to stay with me for a while, and Noah visited regularly. We spent time together, rebuilding, learning to trust again. I didn't need to go back to the life I'd left behind. What I had now, this was mine, and I was going to keep it,